Most people, when traveling on a road like this, don't even give it a second thought. They're worried about getting from one place to another, but they're not worried about what they're driving on, because this road has been provided to the general public to be something that provides you a safe and efficient way to get from one place to another. But as transportation planners, we often have questions. Why was the choice made for a 4-lane highway? What was wrong with the old one? And who made the decisions? And what were the impacts of those decisions? So that's the theme of this lesson. We are going to look at how the provincial transportation planning process supported the development of a new 4-lane Trans-Canada highway through New Brunswick that replaced an alignment that was built and developed in the late 1940s. Let's go back to 1949. The development of the Trans-Canada Highway project throughout Canada involved provinces identifying which alignments and existing routes that they'd be interested in having as part of the project. We are concerned today with this route going from Fredericton to Moncton. And you'll notice that it doesn't take the most direct route to go between Fredericton and Moncton. It actually travels south, here to Sussex. Then it travels north again. This was partly a political decision. There was a choice to travel further south to St. John, which was what the city of St. John wanted. There was a choice to take the most direct route. But in this case, because of most of the population along this corridor living in that area there, the choice was to route it through to Sussex. But this had implications in the long term. First, the highway through that particular location went up and down with the topography rather than with the topography, which, unforeseen at the time, was that there was going to be such a change in travel behavior to favor trucks for short and medium distance freight haul rather than trains at the time. And of course, we know what happens to trucks when they go up hills. Heavily loaded trucks slow down. They impede the free flow of traffic, meaning cars get backed up behind them. And if there aren't sufficient passing opportunities, people take risks to pass when they shouldn't. The second, and for passenger travel in particular, was that there did exist a parallel route that was more direct, not as well maintained, but 25 kilometers shorter and didn't require going up large hills. And this route attracted a lot of traffic, a lot of long distance traffic that it wasn't designed to handle. Let's look at the decision the drivers had to make at this particular point here. That is, they can either go left to what was once advertised as a shortcut to Moncton, or they could continue straight to Sussex via the Trans-Canada Highway. And this was an option that was only available to passenger cars. Trucks were restricted from the shortcut route. This route here, which continues as part of the Trans-Canada Highway, is typical of the kind of route that was going through New Brunswick at the time. And you can see that it travels through farming country, so there's the presence of farm vehicles. You can see there's at-grade driveways, which go right into people's front yards, which means there's going to be a lot of slow traffic going in and out. There's lots of climbing lanes because of the hilly terrain. You can see how all these factors work together to create a safety situation and a level of service situation for local traffic and long distance through traffic. Let's go back to that intersection. This time we're going to go left. Now, I drove this road going in the opposite direction, coming back from Moncton, but notice, again, it's not nearly as wide as the other highway. Notice that we're going not through a very populated area, but there's not very many passing opportunities. And when you get to the end of the road, you'll notice that we come to a T intersection. So just imagine driving this late at night, driving long distance, let's say from Halifax to Toronto, coming through New Brunswick. You're driving along a relatively straight stretch of road and you come right to a T intersection. This intersection was notorious for being a collision hotspot.
part of the most important road in the country, the Trans-Canada Highway in New Brunswick. There are stretches of it that tourists grumble about and truckers despise. It's narrow and winding and even downright dangerous. As Kevin Evans reports, traffic tie-ups are getting worse and there are more and more accidents.
It's a highway designed in the 50s, unable to cope with the traffic of the 80s. 550 kilometers of patched, twisting blacktop, 2 lanes all the way. It is the transportation corridor into and out of Atlantic Canada and the eastern New England states. In many sections, 1 out of every 3 vehicles is a transport truck.
It's too small a road for so many cars, you know. It's just, the traffic's just too heavy for this route.
And getting heavier. As the trend towards shipping freight by road instead of rail continues, truck traffic along this route is increasing by 10% every year. That, coupled with thousands of direct access points to the Trans-Canada and an infusion of tourist traffic in the summer, creates what traffic engineers call high accident risk conditions.
It can get on your nerves down through here. It does. Really get on your nerves.
The Dean of Engineering at the University of New Brunswick says he avoids the Trans-Canada whenever possible. Frank Wilson headed up a recent study of the highway.
It is the weak link of the entire system. From a safety point of view, it is by far the worst situation.
36 people died in accidents on this highway last year. Experts say the number of fatalities would be reduced by half if the highway was expanded to 4 lanes. New Brunswick Premier Frank McKenna has said construction of a 4-lane divided Trans-Canada is a priority of his 9-month-old government. It's already looking at possible routes. But with a $1.5 billion price tag over 10 years, New Brunswick says it cannot afford to go it alone.
We feel that the federal government has a responsibility here. This is a national problem.
So far, Ottawa has agreed only to study the need for a new highway. Negotiations for a cost-sharing agreement will be difficult and likely very drawn out. Federal officials point out that New Brunswick has already received more federal highway dollars in the last decade than any province except for Newfoundland. Even if New Brunswick does eventually get federal help, with a construction period of between 10 to 15 years, it will be well into the 21st century before this route becomes less congested and less dangerous. Kevin Evans, CBC News on the Trans-Canada Highway in New Brunswick.
By 1993, the government of New Brunswick felt it had an answer: the development of a toll highway, operated, maintained, and financed by the private sector, built by the private sector, paid for by the government of New Brunswick and toll users. Several studies followed, but the promise of this project was that instead of building piece by piece to the network, a whole section of the highway could be built and address these issues with safety in a much quicker way than traditional building means. So while the Department of Transportation and the government of New Brunswick felt like it had a solution, coming into 1999, as the highways opened and tolls were put up, what did the public think?
People throughout Atlantic Canada are furious about the toll road, which overlaps part of the Trans-Canada Highway. And when collection booths opened for their first full day of business, angry drivers tried to drive their point home. Lori Graham has the story.
They arrived early this morning, honking their horns, making the reason for their protest clear. Most people here are frustrated. They don't want to pay a 75-cent toll on a highway that was built and paid for more than a year ago.
We pay enough taxes in our fuel now to cover all the costs of these roads. This is just a rip-off. This country's poor enough now without more taxes.
I don't like what the government's pulling off here.
They held up traffic, taking time to write checks for 75 cents, trying to pay with bills that couldn't be cashed, and forcing toll collectors to count pennies.
I got 32 so far, sir.
This section of the Trans-Canada connects the Atlantic provinces to the rest of the country. By the year 2001, 3 more toll booths will be added between Fredericton and Moncton, charging cars almost $7 a trip and trucks almost $30. New Brunswick's neighbors up the road are not amused.
Any toll on any highway between the major marketplace in Newfoundland and Labrador is a toll on the cost of moving goods and services to this province. We could be tolled out of existence.
PEI's premier has threatened to sue the New Brunswick government.
The toll roads really are an inhibitor to the easy movement of goods and people through the region.
This is not the only tolled section of the Trans-Canada Highway. Just over a year ago, Nova Scotia started charging motorists to travel along one area. But that section is not a gateway to the entire Atlantic region, and in New Brunswick, motorists have to dig much deeper into their pockets. But not everyone is angry about paying the toll.
I don't mind paying the 75 cents, but this waiting in lineups is crazy. They should have more lanes to get through.
But those who oppose the toll say they'll get their revenge when the next election rolls around.
In fact, it wasn't too long after this that tolls became an election issue in New Brunswick. And the winner of the election? The Conservatives' Bernard Lord, who ran on an anti-toll platform. How did that turn out?
Heading out on the highway got a bit cheaper today in New Brunswick. The provincial government has now stopped collecting tolls on a new stretch of the Trans-Canada Highway. As change takers took their money out for the last time, others waved through the traffic. Now that the controversial tolls are gone, Premier Bernard Lord says he's lived up to all the promises he made during last year's election. Lord also says the move will save the province money, as running the booths was expensive. But the opposition Liberals say toll-free roads now will probably mean higher taxes later.
We can look back on this project 20 years or more later and see that the Trans-Canada Highway project, which beget 2 additional public-private partnerships, none of them which are toll financed, beget these projects that ultimately resulted in a much safer and efficient highway system. But it's really interesting to follow the progression, isn't it? From a national project in the late 40s, early 50s, to a point where the infrastructure wasn't keeping up with the road vehicle demand, to the point where even the systems themselves, the system within the provincial government to fund and repair highways wasn't able to keep up, which necessitated the public-private partnership, funded through tolls, which ultimately resulted in public backlash and getting rid of the tolls. And interestingly enough, there has been some discussion about bringing tolls back as a way to deal with the financial challenges in the province. Yet, as we make our way down the old Trans-Canada Highway again to Sussex, we're reminded that with the construction of the new alignment leaves an old alignment, bypassing communities that had grown up around it or that rely on it. Sussex was one of many towns, many communities that were bypassed by the highway. Ultimately, it provides a much safer, more efficient route, but it does raise questions in terms of the impact on the economy of communities that are left behind and were dependent on that traffic. Something that we need to be mindful of as transportation planners.